They say names carry power. And in the hidden corners of ancient texts, there's one name that stirs both fear and fascination: Samael. To some, he's the angel of death, God's ruthless enforcer who takes life when the time comes. To others, he's something far darker: the father of demons, the tempter of Eve, the shadow behind the serpent in the Garden of Eden. But who is Samael, really? Is he a servant of divine will, or a rebel cloaked in heavenly light? The mystery of Samael stretches back thousands of years, tangled in the writings of Jewish mysticism, the Talmud, and hidden corners of Kabbalah. He's not your typical angel. He doesn't come with harps or halos. Instead, he comes cloaked in smoke, his eyes burning with judgment, or perhaps something more dangerous: desire, vengeance, rebellion. While other angels obey, Samael questions. And in that questioning, he walks a thin line between light and darkness. In some texts, he's the one who refused to bow to Adam, believing no creature of dust deserved his reverence. In others, he's sent by God to do what others won't: to punish, to destroy, to test. He's a paradox, a divine being who carries out death, yet is blamed for the corruption of humankind. A warrior for heaven, yet linked to the fall of angels and the rise of evil. Even his name, Samael, can mean the venom of God. That alone raises questions most are too afraid to ask. Throughout history, theologians, mystics, and scholars have argued over his true nature. Is Samael a necessary force, doing the dirty work of a just God? Or is he a fallen creature, pretending to serve while plotting his own rise? Some believe he's the same figure who led legions of angels into rebellion. Others claim he's the angel who whispered to Cain, who followed humanity into the shadows after the fall. And then there's the most chilling idea of all, that he never fell from grace because he was never meant to be holy in the first place. And what about Lilith, the so-called first wife of Adam, who is often linked to Samael in ancient folklore? Together, they're said to have birthed countless demons, spirits of chaos that still wander the world today. But is this just symbolic myth, or could these stories hold some forgotten truth buried in time? The lines between myth, scripture, and hidden knowledge are thinner than we think. If Samael is real, what does that say about the forces that shape our world, seen and unseen? Are we dealing with an angel of justice, or the architect of our darkest nightmares? In this series, we're going to peel back the layers of mystery and dive into the ancient texts that shaped these legends. But be warned, once you start down this path, you may never see angels or demons the same way again. And it all begins with a choice Samael made long before the world as we know it began. But what was it? And why has it been hidden for so long? Before we can understand that choice, what Samael did, or perhaps refused to do, we have to look deeper into where his story begins. And strangely, it doesn't start in hell or in some fiery abyss. It starts in heaven, in the divine courts among the angels. Samael wasn't cast out like Lucifer. He wasn't punished or stripped of his wings. He remained, but not like the others. He was different. Ancient Jewish texts, like the Talmud and Midrash, describe Samael as the accuser, the one who tests the souls of men. Think of him like a prosecutor in a divine courtroom. His job wasn't to destroy out of hate, but to reveal weakness, to bring out the truth, even if that truth hurt. And in doing so, he began to blur the lines between justice and cruelty. Was he helping God by exposing humanity's flaws? Or was he enjoying a little too much? Some stories go even further. They say Samael was the angel who wrestled with Jacob in the night, leaving him limping at dawn. Others believe he was the force behind Pharaoh's hardened heart, the voice in the storm that whispered destruction. He wasn't evil in the way we understand it, but he wasn't comforting either. His presence always meant something was about to be tested, broken, or lost. And then there's the serpent, the one in the Garden of Eden. Many ancient scholars didn't believe that was Satan at all. They pointed to Samael, the one who tempted Eve, not out of rebellion, but out of a belief that knowledge, asterisk, even forbidden knowledge, asterisk, was something worth having. It raises a haunting question. What if the fall of man wasn't an accident, but a test? And what if Samael was the one sent to carry it out? But perhaps the most unsettling part of his story comes from his connection to Lilith. Unlike Eve, Lilith wasn't created from Adam's rib. She was formed from the same earth, equal, strong, and unwilling to submit. She left Eden by her own choice. And what happened after? According to older texts, she met Samael. Together, they created beings not of flesh and blood, but of shadow, spirits and creatures that weren't bound by the rules of heaven or earth. Some believed these offspring haunted the night, whispering into the hearts of kings and warriors, sowing chaos in places where light once ruled. Whether literal or symbolic, the union of Samael and Lilith paints a picture of a world where divine order wasn't as clear as we were taught, where angels didn't just sing and praise. They questioned, they challenged, and sometimes they crossed lines that were never meant to be touched. But here's where the trail goes cold. The ancient texts don't agree. Some call Samael a servant of God, others a deceiver. Some say he still walks among the angels. Others claim he was locked away with his children, hidden beyond the veil. The truth? It's scattered, buried in fragments, half-truths, and warnings. So what was that one choice? The moment everything changed? That's what we're going to uncover next. Because buried in an old scroll, nearly lost to time, there's a single line that hints at the answer. But what it says might change everything we thought we knew about angels, demons, and the fragile space between them. That single line, tucked away in a barely legible scroll found in the ruins of an old desert monastery, read, asterisk, and Samael chose silence when the heavens cried for truth. Asterisk scholars have argued over what that even means. Was it a betrayal? A refusal? Or was it obedience taken too far? Some believe it points to a secret event, one that happened before humanity ever opened its eyes. A cosmic moment where Samael was asked to intervene and didn't. This is where the real conflict begins. Because Samael wasn't just another angel with a difficult job. He may have been caught between two forces pulling him in opposite directions. On one side, divine duty. On the other, the raw truth of what humanity is capable of. He saw something others didn't, and instead of warning heaven, he held his tongue. Why? Some ancient writings suggest Samael wasn't acting alone. They mention a council of powerful angels, watchers, who once debated what to do with humanity after the fall. These beings weren't evil, but they weren't comfortable with how much power humans were given. One name keeps appearing alongside Samael in these lost records, Azazel. The same figure later blamed for teaching forbidden knowledge to humans, like weapon-making and sorcery. Together, Samael and Azazel might have seen the rise of human free will as a danger, or maybe as a chance. But not all angels agreed. Archangel Michael, the warrior of heaven, is said to have confronted Samael more than once. In some Kabbalistic writings, they clashed, not with swords but with words. Michael accused Samael of pride, of leading others into rebellion with questions disguised as wisdom. Samael, in turn, accused Michael of blindness, of following orders without understanding the cost. The heavens trembled, but no side claimed victory. Meanwhile, humanity continued to evolve, building cities, empires, belief systems. And all the while, the influence of Samael lingered, quiet but present. In old Jewish folklore, some rabbis warned of dreams where a shadowed figure would appear, offering truths too sharp to hold. A being with eyes like burning coals who spoke in riddles. They called him the angel of poison, not because he wanted to kill, but because once you heard his words, you couldn't forget them. The subplots begin to tangle here. In some circles, Samael is said to have taken interest in certain bloodlines. Whispers about chosen families who carried something ancient in their veins. Were they meant to lead or destroy? There are even tales of prophets who vanished after claiming to see the true form of the accuser. One such prophet, hidden in a scroll written in Aramaic, described a vision where Samael stood on a mountain of mirrors, each one showing a different version of human history, some peaceful, some drenched in fire. He was asked to choose. He didn't. And then there's Lilith. Her story runs parallel, yet always draws back to Samael. Was their union one of love, revenge, or prophecy? Together, they represent the side of creation that refuses to be controlled. If Samael was the hand of divine judgment, Lilith was the voice of wild freedom. What they made together, their children, their whispers in the night, are never fully explained. But their presence echoes in legends around the world, always just outside the light. The more you study these fragments, the clearer it becomes. Samael's silence wasn't weakness. It was deliberate. And whatever he knew, whatever he saw before the heavens cried out, it may be the key to understanding not just who he is, but what lies ahead. Because if that silence was the start of something, then what comes next may already be unfolding around us. The tension between heaven and earth was no longer just written in dusty scrolls or whispered in forgotten temples. It was creeping into the real world. Scholars studying Samael's name began disappearing. Old libraries suffered strange fires, usually starting near sections that held apocryphal writings. People dismissed it as coincidence, until one name kept surfacing over and over again. Samael, the angel of death. But now, not just as a figure from legend, but as something more active. Watching, waiting. There's a chilling theory among mystics that Samael never left. That he still walks among us, not as a ghost or a monster, but as influence. Not seen, but felt. In moments of hesitation, in decisions that shift lives in unexplainable ways. Some say he doesn't need to act directly. His silence, his choice not to interfere, ripples through history like a shadow over everything. Wars, betrayals, moments where humanity stood on the edge and fell. What if those weren't just human failures, but part of something guided? And then there's the scroll. That same ancient piece of parchment that hinted at Samael's silence. It didn't stop there. As researchers translated more of it, they uncovered a prophecy. Not written clearly, but buried in layers of code and metaphor. It speaks of a veil tearing when the balance between judgment and mercy tips too far. And at the center of this chaos stands a figure with wings that shimmer like ash, holding a blade that's never drawn, because the truth alone is deadly enough. The prophecy hints at 3 signs. The first is the rise of false light, leaders who seem holy but are hollow. The second is a cry from the earth, natural disasters that are more than just nature acting wild, but part of a larger correction. The third is the return of the Watcher, the one who knows the story from the beginning and holds the end in his gaze. Many believe this Watcher is Samael himself. Now we're starting to reach the edge, because the scrolls were never meant to be public. They were hidden for a reason even the highest orders of religious guardians have long feared, that if Samael's true role is revealed, everything we believe about angels, demons, and divine justice could collapse. What if the so-called war in heaven wasn't about rebellion at all, but about disagreement? Not between good and evil, but between 2 truths that couldn't exist together. And right in the middle of that ancient clash is us, humanity, a creation that was never supposed to survive the test. Some say Samael advocated for our destruction from the start, not out of hatred, but out of a belief that we wouldn't withstand freedom, that we'd fall. And as the world grows more chaotic and the signs seem to line up with that old prophecy, people are beginning to ask, was he right? But just as the final part of the scroll was being translated, the lead scholar stopped. No explanation, no press release, just vanished. All that was left behind was a single note written in trembling handwriting. Asterisk, he never fell. He was placed. Asterisk. Now the question isn't just who Samael is, but why he's still waiting. And what happens when he finally speaks. For weeks, nothing surfaced. The scholar who vanished left no trail, no passport activity, no phone records, not even security footage. It was as if he'd been erased. But then, something unexpected happened. A package arrived at a small, independent research center in Prague. No return address, no explanation. Inside was a fragment of the scroll, sealed in wax with a strange sigil that hadn't been used in centuries. When the researchers opened it, what they found wasn't just writing, it was a diagram. A map, not of a place, but of a decision. a choice that echoed across time, tied to three bloodlines, each unknowingly carrying a piece of Samuel's secret. This was the second twist no one saw coming. While most believed Samuel acted alone, this scroll fragment suggested something more dangerous. He may have planted seeds, not just ideas. Some ancient sources spoke of carriers, people born with a thin thread of spiritual connection to celestial beings. Not descendants in the physical sense, but vessels for will, tools for intervention or destruction. And now, the scroll hinted that three of these vessels are alive today. Unaware, untouched, but not for long. One bloodline is traced to the hills of Ethiopia, another hidden in old city records from southern Spain, and the last believed to be buried under layers of false identities in New York. These aren't people of power or fame. They're quiet, overlooked. But each one has been experiencing the same thing. Dreams they can't explain. A figure with no face standing in fire, whispering truths in ancient tongues. A name repeated over and over in their minds when they wake. Samael. This changed everything. If Samuel's influence is more than philosophical, if it's embedded in people walking among us, then his silence was never passive. It was strategic. He didn't speak because he didn't have to. The story has already been moving forward without him ever lifting a finger. And now, the Watchers, those few beings still loyal to heaven's original law, are stirring. Old texts mention a final confrontation, not between armies, but between chosen vessels of light and shadow. Not to fight, but to decide. And here's where the real fear begins to settle in. If Samael was placed, as a note said, then by who? Was it divine design or a deeper manipulation? Could someone higher than Samael have orchestrated this all along? What if the God these ancient texts speak of was never fully unified? What if even the divine realm has factions, and Samael was simply following a command that never reached the others? As more clues emerge, and the carriers unknowingly move toward each other, signs begin to appear across the world. Symbols burning into stone with no heat. Whispered voices in crowds, saying things no one else hears. Time slipping for seconds at a time, unnoticed by most, but recorded in strange patterns. The veil, as the prophecy said, is thinning. The climax is coming, but the terrifying part isn't what Samael will do. It's what he won't. Because his greatest power might not be death, or judgment, or fear. It might be the one thing no angel, no demon, and no human has ever fully understood. Silence that changes everything. The signs became impossible to ignore. Earthquakes without fault lines. Thunder in clear skies. All three carriers, unaware of each other until now, found themselves drawn to the same ancient place. A ruined temple buried deep beneath Mount Hermon, long believed to be the place where the Watchers first descended. They arrived within hours of each other, guided only by instinct, fragmented dreams, and that same name burning in their minds, Samael. As they stepped into the dark heart of the temple, the symbols carved into the walls began to glow faintly, like memories waking from sleep. Time felt slower, stretched. Each step deeper into the structure pulled at something inside them. Memories they never lived, emotions they couldn't explain. The scroll's map had led them here, but it didn't say what they were supposed to do. Only that once all three arrived, he would answer. And then it happened. A presence filled the air, heavy but not oppressive. The walls didn't shake. No fire fell from the sky. It was quieter than expected. Almost calm. The carriers stood at a circular altar where the light from above didn't reach. And from the center, a figure began to emerge, not in flesh but in form. Tall, cloaked in shadow, wings like folded night, and eyes that held both the beginning and the end. Samael. He did not speak with words. Instead, each of them felt the truth directly in their minds. The silence he had chosen so long ago was not betrayal, but protection. Samael had seen something in humanity even the other angels hadn't. Not just potential for good or evil, but the potential to choose again and again, even after failing. Heaven wanted order. Hell wanted chaos. Samael saw something messy, something real, growth, change. And because of that, He refused to pick a side. But silence has a cost. For centuries, his neutrality allowed darkness to creep in under the guise of structure. False prophets, twisted justice, cruelty in the name of control. And now, the balance had tipped too far. The veil was thinning, not because of him, but because of what the world had become without him speaking. And so, he gave the choice not to the angels, not to the heavens, but to the carriers, the descendants of free will. They would decide whether the veil would close or be torn open forever. Each one touched the altar. The symbols lit up. A pulse spread out from the temple, reaching across the world like a ripple through reality. For a moment, everyone everywhere felt something, a brief stillness like the breath before a storm. And just as it seemed the decision had been made, the final twist came. The carriers were not chosen by Samael. They were chosen for Samael. The voice returned, this time not his. It was older, colder, one the world hadn't heard since the beginning of time. The Watchers were not just observers, they were judges. And Samael, after all these ages, was now the one being tested. Not for what he did, but for what he let happen. The twist wasn't his silence. It was that he thought he had a choice. And the judgment is just beginning. The silence after the judgment felt different. It wasn't the silence of Samael's long refusal to act. It wasn't the heavy quiet of ancient temples or closed scrolls. This silence felt final, like the last page of story being turned. The three carriers stood still, unsure if they had succeeded or failed. Samael remained at the center of the altar, his wings dimming, his form losing its sharpness. And above them, a strange light shimmered in the air, not blinding, but clear, as if truth had weight, and they were finally beginning to understand it. The voice that had spoken, the one older than Samael, older even than the story, didn't return. It didn't need to. Its presence had said enough. Samael had always believed his silence was an act of mercy, of restraint. But now, for the first time, he understood it had been a delay, a pause in a trial that was always going to come. The carriers, drawn by fate and bloodline, weren't there to support him. They were there to witness him. One by one, memories started pouring into their minds. Not their own, but echoes of Samael's existence. They saw him standing at the edge of creation, watching humanity take its first breath. They saw his sorrow when Cain struck Abel. They felt his hesitation at every turning point in history, where he could have intervened, but chose not to, not out of cruelty, but out of conviction. He believed the human soul needed freedom, even if that meant pain, even if it meant risking everything. And in those memories, something else became clear. Samael wasn't the villain, but he wasn't a savior either. He was something in between, a reminder that even in divine systems, there are fractures, places where certainty fades and questions remain unanswered. He was the gray space between black and white, the silent witness to a story too complex for absolutes. As the light above them faded, the temple walls shifted. The ancient structure that had held so many secrets slowly crumbled, not with violence, but with a strange peace. The carriers stepped away from the altar, each feeling like they had aged years in a matter of minutes. And Samael? He didn't vanish. He simply folded into the stillness, no longer needing a form. His purpose, whatever it had once been, was now complete. Outside the ruins, the world felt unchanged. No sky-splitting events, no fire or fury. But something subtle had shifted. News headlines began to reflect small, quiet changes. Nations backing away from conflict. Leaders speaking with uncharacteristic honesty. Whistleblowers stepping forward. It wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, like something had realigned beneath the surface. The carriers returned to their lives, but none of them were the same. The woman from Spain started sharing her dreams online, connecting ancient prophecy with modern consciousness. The man from New York quit his high-paying job to work with forgotten youth in struggling neighborhoods, teaching them the importance of choosing their own path. And the elder from Ethiopia began writing down the stories passed through generations in his village, stories that once seemed like myths, now glowing with deeper meaning. Samael's name began appearing again, not just in theology circles, but in unexpected places, in songs, art, and whispered conversations, but not as a figure of death or darkness, as a symbol of uncertainty, a kind of spiritual reminder that sometimes silence is strength, but other times it's fear in disguise. The watchers, the ones who had judged, never showed themselves again. Their voice remained in memory only, but it left something behind, a question, one that each carrier kept returning to in quiet moments when the world felt overwhelming. What do we do with power when no one is watching? That question was never meant for angels. It was always meant for humans. In the final weeks after the temple event, researchers discovered new fragments of the original scroll in a sealed cave nearby. This time, the words were clearer. It said, Asterisk, the father of demons is not the one who rebels, but the one who waits too long to act. Asterisk, a strange line, but it struck something true. Samael had become feared not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't do. And maybe that's the real message buried under all the myths and debates. Samael wasn't about punishment or power. He was about responsibility, about the weight of choice, and how the hardest path isn't always good or evil, but doing something when you'd rather stay silent. The story ends not with a great battle, but with understanding. The carriers return to the world, not as heroes, but as witnesses, just like Samael once was. And the rest of us? We're left with his legacy, not wings or flames, but a question carved into the heart of our history. When the moment comes, will we speak or will we wait? The mysteries of Samael, angel, accuser, father of demons, or guardian of truth, will always invite more questions than answers. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some stories aren't meant to give us certainty. Maybe they're meant to remind us that we always have a choice. And sometimes the most human thing we can do is to make it.